But interestingly, the United States has now taken a little bit of the high road. I wouldn't call it lawfare, but it can work that way, and that it's forced the Soviets, the Russians now, into a tough position. That's an artist's rendition of space debris. It's not that bad, or we'd all be in deep trouble. But the United States, several years ago, announced we were going to abide by tenets of responsible behavior. And one of them was we were going to seek to stop the generation of long lasting debris. And then last year announced a moratorium on anti satellite weapons tests. Several states joined us. We took that to the United Nations, introduced it in a resolution to embarrass the Russians, and it passed overwhelmingly by a vote of 154 to 8 in favor, with China and Russia and their sock puppets like the Central African Empire and Warner, the Wagner group. This vote was an interesting vote. It doesn't contain anything legally binding. It's just a UN General Assembly resolution, which is a recommendation. But the interesting thing about this was that the United States ensured in the resolution that this was the way states could exercise due regard under the Outer Space Treaty. An interesting development. A lot of those countries that joined in are parties to the Outer Space Treaty. Interesting development by the United States to move forward on eliminating destructive anti-satellite weapons testing, which we don't need to do, and other countries don't need to be encouraged to do it. So what's the Russian response to this? Their favorite lawfare tool, the PPWT. Hey, they say, we can't diddle around with these little, stopping debris and stuff. We want to demilitarize all of space. We want to disarm all of space. You need to vote instead for the PPWT and not waste your time on this. In this most recent meeting a few months ago, the Chinese representative was banging on our Woomer manual, the draft that we sent out. he was saying how confusing all these rules are. Is that yes, the space is complicated, but the other thing that he said, and this is really quite intriguing, and it continues to be the Russian and Chinese line: we're not going to discuss the law of armed conflict in space. Never going to do it. Protecting civilians, all that stuff. Nope, none of that. We're not going to do it because to do so would legitimize armed conflict in space. The Red Cross vociferously disagrees with that. But again, both the Chinese and Russian representative say, well, instead of messing with these things, instead of messing with the law of armed conflict, let's focus on dismantling weapons. Let's focus on getting rid of weapons in space. And so again, that is always held up as a roadblock to talking about just about anything. But in the limited time I cannot pass without saying the Russians are truly skillful at building loopholes and traps in international agreements. I've watched them do it, and I've watched American incompetent negotiators sit back and let it happen. They violate treaties, but they abide by a number of them that are convenient when it's time to abide by them. And they also very much take the international law as an art form quite seriously and work at finding ways to sign agreements that don't commit them to do the things the other side wants them to do. So you have to hand it to them, actually. They're excellent lawyers. And as a couple of examples, of course, you see the blunt force at the UN, the veto. The Russians weren't going to join the UN Charter without that veto, and they're exercising it liberally. But it's more interesting to see all the ways they subvert the West and help their allies, as in the case of Iranian ballistic missiles. The Iranian ballistic missiles weren't supposed to be in the joint plan of action for the nuclear stockpiles that the Iranians were building. Recall that for many years, the UN Security Council categorically prohibited them from building, launching, testing ballistic missiles. And that was the rule until it was abandoned by a slightly less than brilliant Secretary of State who let slip into one of the annexes this clause that no longer are they bound by that treaty, but instead Iran is called upon not to undertake any ballistic missile activities, design, and so forth. This goes back to Laura's excellent point about being a very careful lawyer with the words. You can't be too careful with the words as a lawyer. The Russian representative schooled Americans at the UN when the Americans complain about all of these increasing Iranian ballistic missile tests. He accurately says, hey, look, the resolution calls upon Iran to refrain from various ballistic. And he notes, hey, a call is different than a ban. You can violate a call. You can't violate a call. You can comply with it or you can ignore it, but you can't fail to follow it or you violate it. And this is so true. He says the legal distinctions there. What does the American representative say to this? This is embarrassing. Ambassador Packard, Russia seems to be lawyering its way to look for reasons not to act. Well, alternatively, the United States should be lawyering its way to be more careful in the agreements that it signs.